She was standing in the doorway of the house I grew up in, arms folded, watching me pack a garbage bag with my own hands. My stepmother didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The movers she'd hired were already in my father's study, boxing up his things. I was 23 years old, and I had just buried my father 2 days before. The lawyer confirmed it this morning, she said, finally. The estate goes to me. You're welcome to take personal items. Clothes, photos, anything in your room. I looked at her. She had been married to my father for 6 years. 6 years, and she spoke to me like I was a tenant who'd missed rent. I didn't argue. I'd already read the will myself. I'd sat in that boardroom on Bay Street, across from my father's longtime lawyer, and listened to him read out words that didn't sound like my father at all. Everything, the house in Oakville, the investment accounts, the shares in his consulting firm, left entirely to her. There was one line about me, a sum of $10,000, to be transferred within 60 days, $10,000. My father had built a 7-figure business from scratch. He used to tell me that everything he worked for me. I tied the garbage bag closed and walked out the front door. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. I stayed with a university friend in Hamilton for the first 2 weeks. He had a couch and no questions, which was exactly what I needed. During the day, I'd sit at the kitchen table pretending to look for work, but mostly I was just trying to understand how my father, the man who called me every Sunday, who drove 4 hours to watch me graduate, who once said you're the only thing I built that actually matters, could leave me with the equivalent of a used car. My father's name was Warren Aldridge. He'd started his firm in the late 90s doing environmental assessments for construction projects across Ontario. Nothing glamorous, but steady. He was careful with money the way people who grew up without it tend to be. He didn't buy flashy things. He drove a Civic until it rusted. He wore the same winter coat for 11 years. Every dollar he made, he saved or reinvested, and by the time I was in high school, he'd built something real. He met her when I was 17. She was polished in a way my father wasn't. Good at rooms, good at conversation, the kind of person who makes everyone feel chosen. I didn't dislike her at first. I just didn't know her. And then they got married quickly, quietly, and something about my father shifted in ways I couldn't name. He stopped calling as often. When I asked about the business, he'd changed the subject. Once, about a year before he died, he called me late on a Thursday night, not his usual Sunday, and started talking in a way that felt almost like he was rehearsing something. He said, "I want you to know that whatever happens, I've made sure you'll be okay. I've taken care of it." I thought he meant the will. I told him not to talk like that he wasn't going anywhere. He laughed a little and let it go. He had a heart attack 8 months later. He was 61 years old, healthy as far as anyone knew. No warning. After the funeral, after the will, after the garbage bag, and the Oakville driveway, I kept coming back to that phone call. "I've made sure you'll be okay." Those words were not consistent with $10,000 in a garbage bag. I started going through the small box of things I'd taken from my room. Old photos, my grandfather's watch, a few books. At the bottom, under a folded team photo from my high school hockey team, I found an envelope I didn't recognize. It was sealed. My name was on the front in my father's handwriting. Not typed, handwritten, in the particular way he wrote my name, the J with a small loop he'd had since I was a kid. I sat on my friend's couch and held it for a full minute before I opened it. Inside was a single index card. "Jamie, if things have gone the way I'm afraid they might, go to the property on the Magnetawan, the one your grandfather built. You'll find what you need in the boathouse. Don't tell anyone. Go alone. I'm sorry I couldn't explain this in person. I love you." I read it 4 times. The Magnetawan. I knew the river. My grandfather, my father's father, had owned a piece of land up near Burke's Falls, in the Parry Sound district, somewhere off a gravel road I'd been to exactly once as a kid. I remembered a dock, a smell of pine and still water, a boathouse with a green metal roof. I couldn't have been older than 8. My father had never mentioned the property again after that. As far as I knew, it had been sold years ago, or forgotten, or lost in some estate settlement after my grandfather died. Apparently not. I didn't tell anyone. I loaded 2 days of food into a backpack, borrowed my friend's truck, and drove north. It's about 2.5 hours from Hamilton to Berks Falls if you take Highway 400 through Barrie. Past Barrie, the landscape changes, the suburbs dissolve, and you're suddenly in rock and tree, the Canadian shield coming up through the earth like bones. By the time I turned off the highway and onto the county road, it was late afternoon and the light was going gold and flat through the birch trees. I had only the rough memory of a child and a hand-sketched map my father had drawn in the margin of the index card. So small I almost missed it. A creek crossing, a fork, a long driveway through second-growth forest. I almost drove past it. The entrance was completely overgrown, just a gap in the tree line with 2 old cedar posts on either side, no sign. The truck barely fit through. Branches scraped both mirrors. I drove slowly down a track that hadn't seen tire marks in what looked like years. The grass down the middle grew knee-high. The track wound for about 400 meters before it opened into a small clearing at the edge of the river. The cabin was still standing. Barely. The porch had partially collapsed on one end, and the siding had gone gray and warped, some boards curling away from the frame. But the roof looked intact, and the windows were still in place, filmed with years of dust. A rusted canoe leaned against the side of the cabin. Birch trees had grown up close to the south wall, their trunks pale and thin, pressing in. And down at the water, a small dock rotting, one section tilted into the river. There was the boathouse. Squat, green metal roof exactly as I remembered. A sliding door held shut with a length of wire wrapped around a nail. I sat in the truck for a moment, listened. Nothing but the river and a crow somewhere in the trees. I got out and walked down to the boathouse. The wire untwisted easily. The sliding door was heavy and swollen with moisture, but it moved. Inside, a fiberglass canoe on sawhorses, paddles, old life jacket stiff with age, the smell of oil and river mud. A rusted metal shelf on the back wall with paint cans, brushes, rags. And on the floor, half hidden under the shelf and pushed against the wall, a gray plastic storage bin with a snap-on lid, the kind you'd buy at Canadian Tire. Someone had wrapped it in a black garbage bag and taped the whole thing with clear packing tape, layered thick, the tape yellowed at the edges but still sealed. I pulled it out. It was heavier than I expected. I sat down on the floor of the boathouse and cut through the tape with my keys. Inside the bin, sealed in 2 large Ziploc freezer bags, was the most organized thing my father ever made. A USB drive, labeled in his handwriting, open first. A manila envelope, thick labeled, legal, original documents. A smaller envelope labeled, for Jemmy, read after. And beneath all of it, wrapped in a flannel shirt I recognized, he'd worn it up at the lake back when I was small, a second USB drive, labeled, backup. My hands were shaking, not from cold. I didn't have a laptop with me. I drove back to a Tim Hortons in Berks Falls with Wi-Fi, sat in the parking lot, and used my phone as a hotspot to look up what I'd need. Then I drove the rest of the way into town, found the only motel, paid cash, and opened my laptop. The first USB drive contained 3 things: a folder of scanned documents, a video file, and a folder of financial records. I opened the video first. My father was sitting at a desk I didn't recognize, not his office at home, not his office in the city. Somewhere plain, a beige wall behind him, a window off to the side. He looked tired in the way he'd looked the last couple of years, a tiredness that went past sleep. He looked directly at the camera. Jamie, if you're watching this, then what I was afraid of has happened. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. I should have talked to you directly. I kept telling myself I'd find the right time, that things would work out, that I was being paranoid. I don't think I was being paranoid anymore. He paused, looked down at his hands. Here is what you need to know. He explained, quietly changed his will 14 months before he died. The change was drafted by a notary in Parry Sound, not his regular lawyer in Toronto, and it had been witnessed by 2 people whose names I didn't recognize. Under the real will, the Oakville house would go to her for her lifetime, which was fair. But the investment accounts, the shares in the business, and a secondary property he'd purchased years ago, a small commercial building in Guelph that generated rental income, were to come to me. The business shares alone were worth something in the range of $800,000. The Guelph property was cash flowing about $4,000 a month. What had been read to me in that Bay Street boardroom was not his real will. He'd suspected, he said, that documents were being moved around without his knowledge. He'd come home twice to find his filing cabinet in a different state than he'd left it. His regular lawyer, a man who had handled his affairs for over 20 years and who had become close to her in ways that made my father uneasy, had been unusually insistent over the previous year that my father update his estate planning. My father had agreed, bought time, and then quietly gone to the notary in Parry Sound on his own. He'd sent the originals to a safety deposit box at a credit union in Huntsville. The manila envelope in the bin contained the keys and the account details. He'd put copies of the documents on the USB drive. "I don't know if this will be enough," he said. "I don't know what they'll do when I'm gone, or how far it will go, but I couldn't leave you with nothing, Jamie. I couldn't do that." The video was 11 minutes long. I watched it 3 times. The manila envelope confirmed everything. There was the real will, signed and notarized. There were bank statements showing the Guelph property and the investment accounts. There was a printed email chain, forwarded to the notary for safekeeping, between her and my father's lawyer discussing the updated estate arrangements in language that only made sense if they had agreed in advance to present a different document. There was also a handwritten note from my father, dated about 8 months before he died. "I've spoken to someone at the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit, informally. They said if I have documentation of document fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, it would be worth pursuing. I am documenting everything." I sat in that motel room until 2 in the morning, reading every page. I called a lawyer in Barry the next morning. Not anyone connected to my father's estate, someone I found through the Law Society referral service. I explained the situation. She asked me to come in that same afternoon. I drove down from Berks Falls with the bin in the back seat of the truck, wrapped again in the garbage bag. She went through the documents for 2 hours while I sat across from her. When she was done, she set the last page down on her desk, looked at me and said, "This is a strong case. I want you to understand that this will be a process. But what you have here is real. We filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the estate assets the following week, before anything could be transferred or liquidated. The notary in Parry Sound confirmed the real will was genuine. The credit union in Huntsville confirmed the safety deposit box, which contained the original signed copies. Her lawyer sent a letter arguing the Parry Sound will was a forgery. The notary had records. There were 2 witnesses. The signatures had been independently verified. The claim went nowhere. My father's regular lawyer was referred to the Law Society of Ontario for professional misconduct. An investigation was opened. Within 4 months, he'd surrendered his license rather than face the full hearing. She retained her own legal counsel, argued the original will was valid, and lost. The estate court found in favor of the Parry Sound document. She kept what was fair, the Oakville house, for her lifetime, as my father had intended. Everything else was returned to the estate and distributed to me. The Guelph building, the investment accounts, my father's shares in the business, which I later sold to his business partner in a transaction that took 6 months to close, but which left me, at 23 years old, more financially stable than I had ever imagined I would be at that age. I went back to the Magnetawan property that summer. I brought tools, work gloves, a case of ginger ale, and no particular plan. The cabin was in rougher shape than I'd first registered. The porch needed to be fully rebuilt. 2 of the floor joists had rotted through, and the siding had to come off in sections. I hired a local contractor from Berks Falls for the structural work and did the rest myself over the course of 3 weekends. The boathouse I fixed first. New boards on the dock, new rollers on the door, a coat of green paint on the metal roof to match what it had been. I found the old fiberglass canoe structurally sound under all the dust. I patched it, sealed it, put it in the water. It floated. The cabin took most of the fall. By October it was livable. Not finished, but solid, warm. I put a wood stove in the main room and a proper bed in the back bedroom. I built shelves along the west wall and started filling them with books. I left the rest for later, which is how my father always approached things he loved. A little at a time. Don't rush it. I don't know if my father thought he was going to survive long enough to explain all of this to me in person. I don't know how much he understood about what was happening to his own health in those last months, or what he suspected, or whether the late Thursday call was him trying and failing to say more than he managed to say. I think about it sometimes. Standing at the dock in the early morning when the river is still and the mist is sitting low on the water. I think about what it costs a person to know something is wrong and to feel unable to speak it directly. I think about the flannel shirt he used to wear up here and the fact that he wrapped his most important documents in it and what that particular detail does to me even now. He didn't leave me a fortune right away. He left me a trail. He left me a task. He left me, I think, what he believed would be the safest possible version of the truth. Something she couldn't take. Something that would still be there waiting, something that only I would know how to find. He knew me well enough to know I'd drive north. He knew me well enough to know I'd open the envelope. He knew me well enough. I kept the Magnetawan property. I'll keep it until I can't anymore. Every time I cross the creek on the gravel road and the cabin comes through the trees, I feel something settle in my chest, the particular kind of peace that only comes from a place that was meant for you all along, even when you didn't know it existed. My father was not a man who said things twice. He didn't need to. He said what he meant, and he meant what he built, and what he built was still here, waiting for me, exactly where he left it.